All right. Well, good afternoon and happy Valentine's Day. Thank you again for being with us today, right after lunch, exactly. My name is Erica Hill. I'm the Community Arts Development Specialist at the Nevada Arts Council in our Carson City office. Community Arts Development supports Nevada's nonprofit arts and cultural organizations, municipalities, public institutions, and communities with a variety of programs and services aimed at building vibrant communities statewide. In this work, we elevate the arts and cultural infrastructure statewide, expand the skill set of Nevada's creative community, cultivate organizational capacity, facilitate professional networking and relationship building between and within communities to increase access to the arts. If you've been to one of our many virtual events in the past few years, you know well what I'm about to say. But those of you who are new here, welcome. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available on our website and our YouTube channel. Please use the question and answer function throughout the webinar, and we do have some staff members with us today who will help answer that. We'll also have a Q&A chat at the end. At the end, you can raise your hand, you can speak, we can promote you to a panelist, and we can go through it live. So, welcome today to Telling Your Story in Grant Applications, How to Write a Great Grant Narrative. We began planning this webinar last year. We're always listening to our grantees and panelists for feedback, and we pay attention to the arts in our state, as you can imagine. What we noticed was how our grantees were struggling to be competitive in their applications because they're not really fully telling their story. Why this is, we think, is that not everybody has a professional grant writer. Or even if you do, or you have grant writing experience, you might not know that we have out-of-state panelists. Or maybe you don't realize that people outside your local community don't know about you. It's our goal today to close the gap that is being created between those who are writing excellent, amazing grants and those who are telling their story, but maybe not in an effective way. Our grants program at the Nevada Arts Council is one of our most publicly known and wide-reaching programs. The entire agency has a role in making this program happen. Our grant staff are involved year-round in managing the entirety of our many grant programs, and our program staff lead in outreach, project feasibility, and technical assistance. We all check grant applications for eligibility, arrange panels, and join in on agency-wide discussions of how to make our grants program better, more accessible, and more equitable. We are boots on the ground, and we have found from our work and immersion into a global network of art administrators is that organizations aren't fully telling their story, and we're here to help you do that today. Today, we'll be covering the three main sections of our grant applications. First, narrative, second, budget, third, support materials. And how can we use these areas to tell the full story to make a case for funding? We'll also be providing examples from our highest scoring operating support grantees who have given us permission to share with you all their parts of the many applications. As we jump in, I do want to remind you that you can find more information on our website by contacting an Arts Council staff member or looking for this webinar on our YouTube channel. So, really quick, before I get into the nitty-gritty of content, I do want to say that this webinar today will be for anyone who's writing a grant. Specifically, I look at organizations, but we will be going through the entire grant process as well. We have many open grants right now. We are hefty into our grant season. The first one that is closing is the project grant for organizations. This is for nonprofit organizations and public institutions, such as university departments, for a creative project that has a community impact. It is up to a $7,000 award with an in-cash or in-kind match. We also have a similar grant for our Arts Learning Project grant. This is a $7,000 grant with the same match requirements. It doesn't close until May 1st, but it is for a arts learning project, so you have to have a teaching artist and it have a art component for learning. We also have our project grant for artists, Cycle A. This comes in 2 cycles for 6 months within the year, and that is closing on April 1st. It's a $3,000 grant with no match. We also have a new folk life specialist who will be joining and introducing himself at the end of this webinar. And he manages in part our folk life artist grant and our folk life community grant. And the community grant comes on a rolling basis as well, like every 30 days before a project is due. And that is a similar structure to our Arts Learning Express grant. And so all of these grants you can find out in more details on our website if you go under fiscal year 25 grant offerings. And from there, you can get all kinds of important information. You can reach out to the program areas and the specialists who manage these. So why I'm talking about all of our grants today is because there's some common features across all of our grant programs that you'll want to pay attention to see which one you are best likely to get into or how you can maximize your funding. So all of our applications go on a award cycle. And so our fiscal year operates from July 1st of 2024 to June 30th of 2025. And that's why we call it our fiscal year 2025. So you will see that a majority of our larger grants will go onto an annual cycle. They'll be due this spring for funding to be delivered in summer for a project that's happening between July 1st and June 30th. Our express grants can be submitted 30 days before a project at the latest. And then our project grant for artists has two cycles, cycle A and cycle B. Cycle A going from July 1st to December 31st, and cycle B January 1st to June 30th. So why I'm having a big arrow over here is these are our snapshots of each grant that you will find on our website. And they also go over the eligibility requirements. So every grant has a different eligibility requirement. And depending on if you meet this or not is whether you can apply for the grant. For example, our operating support grantees are not eligible to apply for the project grant for organizations, but they can for the Arts Learning Project grant. It also goes over our review process. Most Nevada Arts Council grants are reviewed by a panel. I would say a majority of the ones that the public are applying for are. It's in our guidelines. And what this means is we have in-state and out-of-state experts who come and educate on the grant process. I'll be going over that a little bit more in detail to come. And it also goes over final reporting. This is a snapshot. We also have a larger grants policy document that I'll be pulling from throughout this webinar that you really want to be paying attention to see what you are eligible for, what are the restrictions, and what are the elements that you need to have at the beginning, middle, and end of your grant process. So I want to go over scoring criteria because while I have a more oversight over the organizational side of our grants, all of our program staff do talk to artists and arts organizers and arts enthusiasts throughout the state. So we have to wear many hats in this role. Our program areas are specialized for those areas, but our grant managers do it all. And so I want to just show some commonalities we have in the different scoring criteria. So our project grant for organizations, for artists, and arts learning project grant are similar in that they look at project planning, and they look at artistic excellence, and they looked at a form of impact. The difference comes into something like arts learning, where it's also looking at the specific arts learning impact, such as what education standards are being hit. And more emphasis is placed on the project grant for artists on artistic excellence, whereas project grant for organization is heavily involved in community impact. So knowing more about the scoring criteria will help you write different grants, but it will also help you to know which one to apply for. So I'm going to go into it a little bit here, and project planning and management is really crucial to our project grants. It needs to be answering, is the project well planned? Does it have a realistic timeline? Does the project have clear and achievable goals, objectives, and outcomes? Does the project involve qualified personnel to plan and manage it? Does the budget reflect costs and appropriate financial resources to support the project? And very specific to arts learning, does the project clearly describe proposed educational content, including a plan to assess learning in arts and culture? And so all of these elements need to be included in, but are going to look different for different grants. Really, though, you want to be speaking to a panelist who does not know you, and you want to be able to show off that you can plan a really well project. So this one gets a little more complicated since there's nuances between grants, but artistic excellence is one of the highest criteria we look at. So specifically for our project grants for organizations, you would be asking about the evidence of professionals associated with the project, whereas for project grants for artists, you're looking at any collaborating artists or the artists themselves. So some of the questions we ask in this is, does the application demonstrate artistic excellence? Is it using qualified artists? Is it collaborating with qualified artists? Does the project utilize an effective process for selecting a teaching artist or selecting arts professionals that you're working with? And important, again, for the project grant for artists is, does the project demonstrate clear artistic concept, including the unique artistic and cultural components and creative elements of the proposed project? So finally, we have impact and artistic merit. I created a generalization for impact since our different grants have a specific impact they're looking for. But impact is something we're going to be talking a lot throughout this webinar for telling your story, because you want to consistently be telling your impact. The questions that you would be answering are, does the project identify and define the target audience or impact to a broader community? Does the project demonstrate a broad or significant impact for the defined community, or address specific challenges or needs, or to the artist's personal craft or body of work? Does the project demonstrate an authentic and collaborative commitment to inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility? Does the applicant show a plan to reach, communicate, and inform to the target audience? Does the project align with and support the organization's mission and goals? Does the applicant identify and describe methods to evaluate success, impact, and outcomes? So really quickly before we go on, why all this is important is because of that panel review process. After staff review grants applications for basic eligibility and completeness, we pass these applications on to panelists who review and evaluate them. These panelists are made up of both in-state and out-of-state specialists, administrators, artists, and educators. These panelists score grant applications and then make funding recommendations to the Nevada Arts Council Board. Not all applications are funded, and grant awards may vary from requested amounts. This is very competitive in that way. During panel meetings, only the panelists participate in the discussion and scoring of applications. So if you're coming to a panel meeting, you can't argue anymore about why we need to fund you. You have to do that in your application. Panelists are required to disclose all known conflicts of interest with any grant applications and abstain from the discussion and scoring of the specified applicants. We do this to create an unbiased environment to have both in-state and out-of-state. And again, why that becomes important is because not every panelist is going to know your story. So now getting into the actual bit about telling your story, all of our grants have something in common. There's 3 sections to the application. There's the narrative, where you tell your story and present a compelling case for funding, the narrative proposal. There's the budget, where you show your story with numbers, restating your proposal in the language of dollars. And then there's support materials, where you demonstrate your story and show the best examples of your quality of work. We're going to talk a lot about narrative today, but we will touch on the other 2. So I want to just really emphasize a few key points about the narrative, though, to try to even out that leveling field and lower those divisions. And it starts at the beginning. It's at the beginning. You want to use a separate document. You know, you hate to be working on something and lose it all. When I was in grad school, there was stories of how people's computers would just die on them in the middle of writing a book, basically. And so I got this drilled into me of always using a separate document, such as Microsoft Word or Google Docs, and saving your work repeatedly. Specifically, I've grown to really like something like Google Docs because it auto-saves, but there's the caveat that you don't always have internet access. These features are also really helpful for checking word count and spell check before you're putting it into the field, because there's character limitations. And this really gets into the worst case scenario. You have to start again. You've done all this work for these lengthy grant applications, and you know, something happens, you lose your internet, or something odd happens, right? Your computer restarts. I had one where I had to do a complete factory reset a couple months ago, and I was really grateful that I had all my personal files backed up. So it really is at the start, and this is how you can save yourself some frustration and be able to take the time you need to. So don't forget to write it down. It's also really important to write as if we don't know you. I'm going to keep emphasizing this throughout the entire webinar today. But the reason why is you can't assume that panelist is familiar with your organization, your art form, your project type, your discipline, or any other detail. You need to be proud and passionate and honest. You need to make a clear case for your support, telling them who you are, what you want. You want the reader to get to know you. And you want to be able to define all of these specific things that make you special. It's also really important to not just tell someone, but show them. Panelists need to be shown what you're describing, not just told. And this can be a combination of narrative, the numerical, the visual elements. Every statement you make should be backed up by a metric, a data point, or evidence to support what you're claiming. For example, you don't want to just say that audience participation increased in the past year. You want to say something like audience participation increased 10% this past year. We sold this X amount of tickets, or we had this X amount of feedback. Providing an example does not necessarily always have to be numerical, but showing that impact of the statement you're making in everything you're writing about. So in summary, it's important to utilize the entire application to tell a full story, and it needs to flow and build from one section to the next. We're going to really get into this with the examples, but the main takeaways are: state who you are, be proud, be honest, tell them all about yourself. But while you're doing that, also keep it concise. You want to focus on those main points. By doing that, you want to define your organization, your community, your project, your key personnel. If there's words that you're using that are specific to your field, you need to also define them, because they might not be specific to mine or to the panelist. Use each question as an opportunity to keep building your story. Do not be repetitive. If you're saying something in question one, build off of it in question two. Don't repeat yourself. And be specific. Make sure to show and not just tell. So now I'm really excited to be jumping into some narrative examples. As I'm going through this, please ask yourself, how is my application different or similar to these examples? Am I writing my story to an audience that doesn't know me? Am I selling myself on my importance and impact? Pay attention to both the structure and storytelling in these. So we got very lucky, and our operating support grantees, some of our highest scoring grantees who write both our operating support grant and Art Learning Project grant, allowed us to use their examples. And here, for this example, is the first question of the operating support grant, which is provide a brief history of your organization and its mission. And this one comes from the Burlesque Hall of Fame. From its start as the personal collection of Jenny Lee, the legendary tassel twirler who first dreamed of a Burlesque Hall of Fame in the 1950s. The Burlesque Hall of Fame has been one of the world's only institutions dedicating to preserving this unique modern art form. For over a decade, Jenny Lee exhibited her collection in her San Pedro bar, the Sassy Lassie, before moving to Helendale, California, and creating a museum and burlesque school, Exotic World, on the grounds of a defunct goat ranch. On her death in 1990, her friend and fellow dancer, Dixie Evans, took up the reins, keeping the museum open in the high desert. Dixie's Exotic World became a pilgrimage site for not only previous generations of performers, but the new generation of neo-burlesque performers, looking to the past as a model for their own futures. When a storm caused irreparable damage to the Helendale site, the collection was moved to Las Vegas in hopes of establishing a permanent tourist attraction and exhibit space for our one-of-a-kind collection. After nearly a decade in a small temporary space, in 2018, we moved into a new 3,000 square foot space on Main Street, finally realizing something of the dream interrupted over a decade earlier. Our mission is to preserve, share, celebrate, and inspire the art of burlesque. And through our museum and public programs, we further the vision of Jenny Lee and Dixie Evans every day. And so why I pulled this one out specifically was how it is tying to its legacy and its historic relevance. It's providing quite a captivating narrative in a short amount of sentences, providing a understanding of the past, the present, and alluding to the future. It also has some key metrics here. We have dates, we have square footage. And through this storytelling, it's telling an impact to me, someone who does not know much about burlesque, the impact of this type of museum. I also really appreciate here the one sentence mission statement. This is something that comes up again and again for our organizations, is what is your mission? Is it tying to your program? But for artists, this is important too. Can you describe the work you're doing in one word or one sentence? And how is that going to help frame your story? I'm going to save my voice here and not read this entire example, but this is from St. Mary's Art Center, and it is also a brief history of their organization and mission. And what it runs through is telling you the story of how their building is a National Historic Landmark dating back to 1875. It talks about how the Art Center was first established and who established it. It talks about becoming a nonprofit and its almost 60 years of programming. What's really important, again, in this is it's providing legacy, historical relevancy. That is all adding to the cultural significance as someone reading this. It describes how programs have evolved, but in it specifically talks about how its mission has stayed true. It used metrics such as dates and years and describes programs. And what I want you to think about with this one is, even if your organization or your artwork is relatively young, are you sharing a synopsis of your history, your legacy? Are you sharing your cultural impact? These are all things to be considering when talking about your own story and grant applications. So for this example, we pulled from the Reno Philharmonic, and it's a program description. And so this is from their Arts Learning Project grant. And again, this goes into the legacy, the history of the program. I will read part of this, so I'll try to go a little quick, but this will be available at the end as well. RPAK has provided free after-school violin lessons to students in grade 2 through 5 at Washoe County Elementary Schools since 2006. The program started at Bernice Matthews Elementary School and has since expanded to Lincoln Park instead. Of all these schools are Title I at risk with a free and reduced lunch population based on family income and determined by school district of at least 70%. The Reno Phil provides all instruments, instructions, and teaching materials. National music education and state standards are used so that the students who participate in RPAK learn how to play the violin or cello in addition to developing not only musical skills, but also fine motor skills, group work skills, and leadership skills, which translate into valuable life skills to be used outside of the music classroom. The Reno Phil fully manages RPAK, offering the program for 95 minutes after school with a combination of instrument instruction and music fundamentals, note reading, and music theory, 3 days a week. The program corresponds to Washoe County School District calendar. RPAK begins within the first couple weeks of the opening of the school year in August 2023 and will conclude at the beginning of June 2024. Each student receives over 150 hours of instruction each year. And so why I pulled this example is their use of defining, which is so important for storytelling. If you see up here, it defines in parentheses what a Title I at-risk school is and how that is defined. And at the bottom, it also defines what music fundamentals is, right? So even if you're not a musician and you're reading this and you're a panelist, you will understand that music fundamentals is note reading and music theory. The metrics here being used are interesting. It's not just the numbers, but it's also talking about the program duration and how they're basing that off the day, the week, the calendar year. And I also find this really important too, because they're not just saying skills when they're saying musical skills. They're describing the skills as musical, fine motor, group work, and leadership. So instead of taking one word, they're really pulling it apart and showing you all the benefits that you're getting from this type of program. All right, and so I'm going to jump into some examples of strategic plans now. This is a really important thing for our operating support grantees, but this is something that I think everybody should be looking at is how are they planning for the work they're doing. In my personal craft, I use something called a SMART plan for my own artwork. And that's how I can balance some art administration with some stuff outside. But, you know, everybody really should be thinking about what is their planning process and what's their evaluation process. And so this example is pulled from Reno Little Theater. I'm going to jump through a couple of these and not read the whole thing right now, but it will be available. Reno Little Theater utilizes a 3-year strategic plan to guide its programming and services under the direction of the executive director. The written plan is created through a series of planning sessions, including a survey sent to key stakeholders, a SWOT analysis, a budget analysis, and a planning session held at the theater. In addition to the strategic plan, RLT also creates individual annual plans for the main stage season, education program, publicity and engagement, development, and facilities management. These plans are spearheaded by staff members who are responsible for those programs and are also reviewed regularly at staff and board meetings. Additionally, RLT values numerous points of view in selection of its main stage productions. A broad and diverse season of plays is selected through the annual meetings of the Artistic Leadership Committee, comprised of staff, board, and community members alike. So all of the meat and potatoes being added to this right now are really showing how the planning is conducted, who is involved, what systems of evaluation are used, why those systems are used, why successes and failures are being examined. It describes tiers and types of evaluations and strategic plans, and how planning metrics are being kept and used. And so through this, in a lot of words, but also a really short amount of space, it is deeply driving at the impact that planning has on the organization and its programs, its staff, its boards, and its patrons. I'm now going to jump into another one from Classical Tahoe. Classical Tahoe was the first of my victims to ask to use their materials because they really have had such a great standing with our grants program. And in part, I believe it's because of how they categorize all of what they do. So here you can see that they're briefly talking about a strategic planning process and that they're doing this at a fall retreat, but the power is in that they are mapping out clear as day in a story, but in a very succinct way for a panelist, what their vision is, what their mission is, what their values are. And then when they're going into their strategic plan, they're numbering each objective. And so, this question actually only asks, what's your 1 to 2 year goal and what's your 3 to 5 year goal? But because they've done this deeper organizational strategy drive, they sneak in here a 8-year goal. And that's objective 2, being named a top 10 US classical and jazz destination by 2030. And being in this panel meeting, this was the only comment one panelist said for basically this entire application was, that's a big goal. And so what you can see here is the effectiveness of doing these planning sessions and being able to categorize what the work you're doing into a measurable goal is. I'm going to jump into a quick example of artistic excellence from one of our operating support grantees. This again comes from the Burlesque Hall of Fame. And it talks about, we plan exhibitions based on a number of factors, including the importance of topic, the material available to build an exhibition with, and the quality of research material available on a topic. Our program staff has nearly 30 years of burlesque experience among the various members and includes an anthropologist and public historian, both specialists in topics related to gender, race, ethnicity, artistic production, and other topics related to burlesque. We also consult with outside experts as well as community representatives through our community council. Our biggest annual program, the BHOF Weekender, features roughly 65 performances over 4 days. Selections of performers is done by a selection committee assembled anew each year. This committee is comprised of 10 performers, producers, academics, and other experts drawn from around the US, Canada, and beyond. Every act is scored on criteria like costuming, musicality, polish, and choreography, and the shows are cast from a highest rated performance. Our Titans of Tease showcase features classic era performers and is selected from performers who were features, that is, a headliner who traveled from venue to venue before 1975. These performances have shown their ability to stand out from the crowd during a time when burlesque was still practiced as a career. Our quarterly show, Tease, is Cast, with the same attention to quality diversity by the museum's executive director, who serves as the executive producer of the Weekender event described above, and the museum's program manager, a highly regarded international performer and producer. And so why I used this specifically from our operating support grantees was the deep explanation of types and levels of internal and external expertise of the organization, where committees are utilized and what they do, why they do it, and the impact of this expertise on programs. So again, this is an example of how telling your story in a short area can give a holistic view of the work you're doing. I'm now going to jump into something that we see across our different applications, which is this question. This one's coming from our operating support grantees, but it's asking about defining the community or population of your organization serves. This is also something that's being asked for the project grant for artists, is what is the impact of your work, or what is the broader contribution it is making to the field? And so while this is reworded, some of the same tenets ring true about how to do this type of grant narrative writing. So I'm just going to provide some snapshots here from our different different operating support grantees. But again, think about how this can impact your own work and your own storytelling. Classical Tahoe, I'm going to come back to because for this, I think they did a really, really great job in defining categories and defining their statistical area and really creating a outline of impact throughout multiple questions. So this slide and the next slide will be parts of one question, and the third slide I'm going to show you is a different question. And so for here, they talk about where the festivals took place in Incline Village, but then they also provide a statistical area, which is the Reno-Sparks Metropolitan Statistical Area. And they tell you about how it is located on the shore of Lake Tahoe and at the University of Nevada, Reno at Lake Tahoe. And what they do here is they actually provide you their information that they've internally took in for their audience, their viewers, their listeners, their members, their artists, and their students. And so all of this becomes important when you put it in context with the rest of their application. And so here you're seeing that they are outlining their demographics now from the Classical Tahoe Incline Village area. And they are pairing these meaningful categories that they have created, such as visitors, right, or attendees. And they're going to pair it here with their residents from the statistical area and the age of their participants and employment and education. And what this does for anyone who's running public programming at all is it shows you how far is your actual reach in a community, right? Are you only serving 4% of the population with the patrons you have coming in? And if you are, how can you better understand that 4%, or how can you better increase your outreach so that helps your programs? But when it comes to grant writing, it also shows your importance, right? Let's say that 75% of who you are serving is children. That is something that you're going to want to talk about in your grant application. So Classical Tahoe does a really good job of outlining the categories that are important to them and then also showing you their demographics. And where that combines is in the next question when they're talking about impact. And so when you're talking about your programming services and activities and how it's impact, they're taking these important, meaningful categories that they've described for their organization and building on it to share this in a very top-down categorical way that is super easy for a panelist to read. They're talking about impact on audience, and they provide key examples here from the 2021 Sierra wildfire season and how that impacted their audience. They're talking about impact on members and the different programs. They even provide a testimonial. It's an incredible shared experience. They're talking about impact on viewers and impact on artists and impact on students. So they took all of those categories that they initially said that they're using as a metric to understand the work they're doing. They combined it with the demographics that is available, and they made it into a really compelling impact story. I'm also going to provide an example from St. Mary's Art Center for this slide and the next slide. And so they do a different take on creating categories. And what they do is they show that they have an understanding of the visitors they had, the artists they engaged, and the different demographics. And what they do is they also break this up into a different meaningful category for them, right? So their meaningful categories include Northern Nevada community and arts and history community. And so they outline what this even is programmatically. And when they combine that and they're going further, they're actually looking at the demographics specifically. So they define Northern Nevada community as an important group for them to understand. And then what they do here is they actually take US Census data and special reports and map that out on their grant application. And, it's just really important to not have these data and demographics separate, right? If you are saying that your artistic medium is impacting a specific type of field, right? You want to define that field and talk about the impact that's already happened and what you're doing new. And the same is true for organizations. If you're saying we're serving Northern Nevada communities, you want to be able to look at what is your impact for your patrons and how does that hold up to these different county datas. So my big tip for anyone doing any grant is really look at your US Census data and special reports, because as you're trying to define that community, it might make sense for you to say, you know what, this really is for a more specific area, the people who are coming in. And as I see folks from outside the county coming to my events or my programming, or I'm in contact with them, that's when I can say my reach is getting bigger. And you can use that as your storytelling of impact. I'm going to go into really briefly some stuff about accessibility. Classical Tahoe, again, is getting picked on. And why I keep choosing them is because they do a very fantastic job at creating categories that are meaningful to them. And here they're talking about physical access, free virtual access, IDEA, which is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And from there, they're measuring each level of impact. And so for physical access, they're talking about the physical accessibility of restrooms and parking and building access. What is wheelchair or handicap accommodated from like a government guideline standpoint. And then they're also going into things about virtual access, which is something that they're providing in the hopes that it helps those with limited access to the arts and the multiplicities of what that means. And so it's not just a physical access, but it's also for folks of different ethnic groups, people with disabilities, communities with disproportionate income levels, people aged 65 or older, and veterans. And then they're also going into their idea work and having very measurable metrics by saying 11% of Classical Tahoe board members are non-white. And Classical Tahoe Orchestra is celebrated for being more diverse than most orchestras, with 20% non-white, 30% Black or Latinx. And by doing this, they're positioning themselves not just into the framework of the Incline Village area, they're actually positioning themselves into the diversity of orchestras in America and really driving home some of that impact. I'm also going to give another example from Luna Little Theater, who's talking about their accessibility. And here they're talking about the facility itself being fully ADA compliant by offering wheelchairs, service animal policies, electronic material. But they're going beyond accessibility as an idea of like a government legal requirement, right? They're talking about a pay what you can ticket for productions, offering scholarships for educational programs, offering production roles to all people regardless of race, gender, age, sexuality, or physical ability. So these are things around access that tie into inclusion, diversity, and equity that aren't necessarily like your legal ADA compliant requirements. And what they're also talking about here is having an idea committee. So they're showing that they're getting continuous work on this and exploring what accessibility means in their organization. And for a panelist reading this, it gives you a full comprehensive story that the different sections of what accessibility means for this organization. And so while it's laid out differently than Classical Tahoe's example, it is still giving you that walkthrough of what this organization values as accessible. And I'm going to pull us back to St. Mary's Art Center to make another comment on accessibility here, because what they're doing is outlining accessibility improvements as part of their accessibility strategic plan. And here they're talking about an ADA ramp and parking installation. At the bottom, they're talking about developing a timeline and target for elevator funding, budget, grant award, design, and construction. What I find really interesting about this is we hear so often that it's hard to make historic sites accessible. This is a national historic landmark, and it is, right? So, but you don't have to ignore this elephant in the room when you're doing a grant application. You can actually talk about your limitations. You can talk about what you're doing to try to break through those limitations, what the goalpost is. And it's not necessarily that you have to have a set deadline for when you're going to have the funding to build an elevator in a historic building, but it's still on your mind and you're still showing how accessibility is a value of your organization. All right, so some tips for your community impact here. Make sure to define any specific terms, categories, or communities described, such as the examples. And this isn't just for organizations, this is for everyone. If you're going to be writing an application, make sure that you're being specific and concise. And you can do this by providing demographics from national, state, or local sources to back you up. You can back up stories with numbers and metrics and demographics from internal reports. You can quote experts and recognize standards, and you can weave this throughout your entire grant application. And one of the examples I want to pause here on is we had someone in panel recently for a project grant for organizations, and they were talking so much about, I want to know how and why, like, people are saying this. And one of the things they said is, even if this grantee had written that they got this not just from word of mouth, but word of mouth by having 5 board members out talking to people, or by a show of hands at an event, it would have been really powerful. And I think of how many exhibit opening and receptions I've been to that are for a arts service side of things. and how often I'm having those really one-on-one testimonials that could be used in your application. I also went to a performance, and the executive director got up and asked a raise of hands if they had heard of a specific thing. And so while we might not always have a hard, fast way to get survey data, this is something you're collecting all the time in the work you're doing. So how are you weaving that through your entire application to keep telling your story and hitting those moments of impact? I'm now going to jump into budgets, and for this section, we'll go a little faster, mostly because I did not want to show you screenshots upon screenshots of people's numbers and lose you there. But this is what we see on our end when we're building budgets for grant applications. This one's from the Project Grant for Organizations. And this is the first bit of it. It's the amount you're asking for. And you'd be going through here and, writing out to hopefully $7,000 of different things you're requesting. And there's different options here, such as like marketing and production, fees for artists. But really the key thing is that you want to match your projected use of funds with the total amount requested. This isn't a section to be like, I want 10 grand and maybe the Arts Council will give me 10 grand, because we have limits, right? But I do highly want to recommend that when you are asking for funding, you're asking for the full amount, as panelists are scoring these and making recommendations to the board. And what we fund out is based on available funding year to year. So make sure you're asking for that money. This is a lengthier side of what this looks like when you're actually writing out the entire overall budget. And it's pretty comprehensive. And this is the part where you can say, yes, my $7,000 project is actually going to be a $70,000 project. Or, my $3,000 arts project, if I'm an artist, is actually going to cost me another $7,000 out of my pocket to make happen. And why it's so important to have this overall budget, even though it's more complicated, is it shows where you're getting community support from, right? So income can be all of these different things, such as like private support, and in kind is volunteer hours and donated materials. So this is arguing to your community support and how feasible is your project, right? We see all the time people coming in for the max amount and they're getting high scores, even though their match is just right on the mark, or their match is quite higher. And why is because they're really showing the support and feasibility they have in this. So I just want to go through some commonalities we see in budgets. For organizations, we often see artist fees. They're using these funds to have artists come in, specialists come in for their project. Marketing materials, such as getting flyers sent out or advertisements online, custom stickers for their event, all kinds of things where they're engaging with a marketing expert. For venue space, especially our performing arts venues, our smaller organizations are regularly coming in for funding to help offset that cost, and then equipment rentals. And then for artists, we often see expendable supplies, professional services, such as getting your music recorded or professional photography or prints. Exhibition costs. Right now, we are in our upcoming next cycle for the Project Grant for Artists. We're getting questions about people being able to do booth spaces, for example, at like Reno Tar National Art Show, which is an allowable cost for that grant. Equipment rentals and transportation. And so while we do have a lot of limitations to our budget, being a state agency and being a funder from the National Endowment for the Arts, there's so many things that you can get creative with to do your creative project. And why you really want to be arguing for this in your budget section, and while it might just seem like a numerical area, is it shows the direct impact of that funding as it's used to support artists and organizations and support those who have venues for arts activities, the local economy and the creative economy. So that section, while some people might not like math, and I totally understand that, it's also one of those areas that you're continuing to tell your story there. And so don't forget that. But of course, I had to get you to some restrictions, because this is what stops most people in the tracks when they're coming in for some of our grants is what are the restrictions around it, right? It's so restricted. So what I did is I consolidated some of our information from our grants policies, which I do recommend just printing. If you're regularly coming in for our grants, just print it, keep it in a binder, a grant Bible of sorts. But the big things here is duplicating costs. You don't want to be duplicating costs for a grant from something like the NEA, or if you've done, you're doing the same project in multiple applications. There's absolutely no fundraising being done with our grant funding. And so what that means is, basically every nonprofit, for example, is consistently raising money. But what you don't want to do is be using this to create an investment, right? You can have entry costs because it costs money to come to this event, but you don't want to be hosting a gala. You don't want to be doing door prizes. You don't want to be paying for awards or competitions. It's not meant to be doing something to serve the organization. Specifically, it's meant to be doing something to serve your targeted audience, your organization, your organizational capacity. And so it's an infrastructure booster. It's something to increase access to the arts. It's not something to increase your money. And a lot of this actually comes down from the National Endowment for the Arts. And so there's no wiggle room for us on this. So like absolutely not fundraising prizes and competitions. And it makes me sad to see that because I know in my nonprofit hat that this is something we all do in the nonprofit world, but it's just not allowed here. And on top of that too, like no purchase of food and beverage, and that's a state rule. So the state does not allow state funds to be used for food and beverage, which I know is really hard to say to a room full of artists and arts organizers that want to have cheese at their event or give out food. Food is a very big cultural pathway. So that one I just really want to focus on because we see that time and time again, and there are some nuances around that, and just really honing in and focusing on what that really means. One of the other things that are not allowed is, of course, anything for illegal activities, but that also includes legal fees. We don't do capital expenditures or general purpose equipment, and that's where I was saying a lot of things about rental equipment. In our general guidelines, it talks about how you cannot exceed 2,500 for any funding source for something that's permanent, but that's actually gets more specific. So that's like a total rule, total amount in the year, total multiple grants. But it's even more specific for each grant. So look at those guidelines down to a percentage or to a number amount. And then there are restrictions for public institutions and universities because they're also receiving funding from federal sources. So they can't use, they can't use a project grant for organization fund to support the salary and overhead of a government agency that's already being supported. And they can't do it for student scholarship because student scholarships are also already being supported. And so it's one of those absolute kind of no-goes that happens. And then there are some limits for creative disciplines that we'll come into. So like journalism, historical or academic documentary film, and electronic media arts, they have to show a deep significance and artistic emphasis, consideration, or distinction. For example, we had a preservation society come in for a project grant for organizations a couple of years ago. And what they did is they were actually paying artists to come and do new projects with land art to bring representation to preservation, but they were creating a project that had a deep consideration, emphasis, and impact for artists who are contemporary artists, right? It's not just that land art preservation is creative, right? It's that they are engaging in the creative community and a creative economy in that way. All right, so I will blast through some support materials and then we'll wrap it up and we'll get to questions. Thank you all for being with me through this. I'm really excited to get to those questions, but I want to first go into somewhat of the support materials because this is, again, one of those areas that might get overlooked, but is really important because this is another opportunity to tell your story, and it's something that you can continue to weave from those narrative elements. Many of our applications ask for artistic samples, marketing and publicity samples, descriptions of key personnel. If you are the artist or personnel, you're submitting your resume or your CV. And all of these are really crucial for ensuring the panelists to see that full scope of artistic excellence, community impact, artistic merit, project planning. And up here, I have some examples from some of our grantees. And I really want to point out the one that's on the right, the St. Mary's Art Center, because this is a list of their personnel, and it's not necessarily their resumes, but it's key points and key takeaways. And then in the center, we have Reno Little Theater's 80th season ticket, and what it's showing is a scope of work that's being done in such a small frame. And then Art Town is showing all of their different sponsors at the bottom and their community impact, but also they're talking about the artists that they're paying to do their artwork. And so all of these end up being really important ways to continue to weave your story through. One of the more powerful ones that I've seen is someone actually uses these sections to provide a PDF of testimonials as an example of artistic excellence. They are interviewing the artist they're working with and including that in. And I found that very creative way to keep tying it back to their impact that they're making. So some tips on this is to always follow the guidelines and limits. Our grants team goes through eligibility before we do, and they're the ones that come in and smack you on the wrist for putting artistic samples in the supplemental information area and putting supplemental information in the artistic samples area. And why that is because our panelists are reading, 50 to 100 applications sometimes, and it's really important it follows a flow so that they can better be able to check off and give you points for your grants. And so it's not something we want to have to do. So if we can get that down now, it would be great for all of us coming into this grant season. But really do follow those guidelines and limits. And part of that goes into video clips. We do have a limit on video clips. We have a limit on words and pages. And so all of these things, it's really important to pay attention to so that you can drive your best story forward. You don't want to put all of it up there. You want to pick the best snapshot. You don't want to be in a rush to remove things because it's too long. You want to really be mindful and thinking of the best thing you can do. You want to provide those specific videos or clips. And one of the things is don't link your entire social media account. That's too much work, honestly, for the panelist, but also it's not providing that specific item you want to highlight. So take a screenshot, pull out that, save it as a video, edit it down. I think one of the things for organizations really specifically and for artists is to make that key personnel section another opportunity to tell your story. So for organizations, talk about the expertise of all the people on your board or all the people that are your staff. And then for yourself as an artist, use that as another opportunity to show your creativity or to really just emphasize how amazing you are and the impact you have had through your past experiences. And again, that compiling of testimonial as a way of supporting artistic excellence was just really a fantastic thing. I don't see that very often. But that is another support material you have available to you is the public, is your artist, is the people you're working with. And to keep weaving that through argues for who you are, what you're doing, and your impact. And then finally, this is a really great way to show the scope of your work. And ask yourself, like, what else is involved in making your art or project? It's not just the tangible physical space or performance or artwork, but there's marketing involved, right? There's outreach involved. There's all these different elements. And so if you can sit there and strategize and think about what is the full scope of the work you're doing, you can add that to the support materials area to really argue for the value of the work you're doing. All right, so I'm about to jump into questions, and I just want to thank you all for being with me here for the last 55 minutes. On the behalf of the Nevada Arts Council staff and board, I want to thank you for your participation today. Your attendance shows your commitment to the arts and culture in our state and ensuring that we can all continue the important work we are doing for our communities in years to come. I also want to plug an event that is happening. We are going to be hosting a statewide arts conference in May 30th to June 1st in Reno. We're going to be switching that off year by year from Reno to Las Vegas. And I want to put that all in your brains because you'll be seeing so much more information from us. And it's going to be a deep intersection of all the things arts can offer. Each of our program areas is leading and designing a cohort. So it's not just going to be for organizations. It's not just going to be for artists or arts educators. It's really going to be a full expression of what the arts community is in Nevada. And so with that, I will stop sharing and open it up to questions. Is there anyone here with a question? You can just raise your hand or, and we'll get you answered. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Erica, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, thank you so much for doing this. I would be interested in seeing even more examples of community impact statements. And I'm interested specifically in seeing them from organizations that are like ours, which is Double Scoop, which is an arts journalism organization. And I wonder if we may actually need to look out of state for examples like that. Do you have any advice for where we can find something like that?
I'm not off the top of my head, but when I think of community impact statements and going back to Classical Tahoe's example where they categorize their audience and their reach, their metrics. I think that one of the better things you might be able to do for that is really look at maybe not even the type of organizations exactly like yours, but others who are working in that virtual world. And that also has a tangible physical in-person presence, but see what they're doing. So maybe not isn't the same type of organization that you are, but similar in that aspect of having a larger reach through a virtual platform.
Okay, is there a secret repository somewhere in the world of grant applications where we can look through piles of them?
Not to my knowledge, but let me take note and see what I can find for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any, but now's a fantastic time to ask. We also have Stephanie Montgomery and Krista Ficken from our grants program in the audience. And I think this also might be a good time, since we're feeling shy, to introduce you all to Brad. I don't know if you've had a chance to meet Brad. He is our new face of folk life.
While we're waiting here for Chris's question, I was just gonna say, I was kind of just Googling statements of impact and grants, and there's a lot out there on writing impact statements for different entities. So that might be a good place to start. I can't think of anything, unfortunately, for our resources internally, but just a little tip if that's helpful.
All right. Oh, let's see. Hi, Kathleen. Thank you so much. I'm glad that we could help you. And please do reach out to one of us if you want some more one-on-one help. Very much happy to provide that. The Project Grant for Organizations is closing in 2 weeks, and I'm the program help for that. So if anyone here is looking to do a Project Grant for Organizations, I'm at your beck and call for the next 14 days before that closes. And then if there's anyone here who has questions about other grants too, since we have such a wide variety of Arts Council staff here, please feel free to ask any questions. And if not, I'll give you a few more minutes back in your day.
I'll just add, I'll say hello to everyone. And then we've also had a series of other grant webinars lately for fiscal year 2025. You can find all those on our YouTube channel. I just did a folk life grants one this morning that's uploaded, and there's also ones for the project grants for artists and organizations on our YouTube channel that you can find there if you're someone who likes to listen to information rather than read it.
I know I'm that person sometimes. Thank you. All right, seeing no questions, I will let you guys all have the rest of your day back. I hope you have a fantastic and very loving Valentine's.